Does he understand why the people of these islands, especially those of us in Scotland, treat him with such contempt? Mr Speaker, before the election, this Prime Minister said he would lower energy bills by £300. Since he took office, they've gone up by £149. He said he would protect the winter fuel payment, but now he's in power, he's stripped it off our pensioners. And he said he lined up for many photos with waspy women, saying he'd have their backs, and he's just betrayed them in the most scandalous way possible. This is now the defining characteristic of this one-trick phony Prime Minister who says one thing and does another. In Scotland, the SNP are 16 points ahead in the polls. Does he understand? Does he understand why the people of these islands, especially those of us in Scotland, treat him with such...
Some voted Labour, some didn't. But the anger out there is so high. They cannot believe what this government is doing. The optics is terrible. They are living the high life. Keir Starmer has had more freebies than any other MP over the last 5 years. I mean, after what he said in interviews and in Parliament, this is the biggest hypocrite.
A Labour Prime Minister who is getting £100,000 worth of freebies from rich donors and organisations, more than every Labour leader put together since 1997, Blair onwards, whilst imposing hardship on pensioners by attacking the winter fuel payments, and that will lead to both pensioners on pension credit who don't get it, as well as many others just above the threshold, potentially freezing to death in their homes, and imposing child poverty, booting out 7 Labour MPs who voted against Tory benefit cuts to those children, whilst just living up the high life with a standard of living beyond the dreams of most people, with a salary that puts him already in the top 1%, but that's not enough. He has to have his clothes and his glasses bought for him by a rich donor. It is just nauseating. I just think I saw this coming because I know who these people are. I've been around the Labour Party for a long time. They don't have a vision. They don't have a soul, politically speaking. They don't have any clear principles.
The UK's current political depression has led to the government's decision to side with the EU and restrict investigations into the paedophilic mass rape of children and crimes committed by Muslims. In response to the Southport incident, Keir Starmer could potentially step down if found guilty of breaching lockdown mandates and direct links to the child rape scandal. This has caused MPs to resign and put many at risk of losing their seats in Parliament. The UK's current political climate is causing a need for a more democratic approach to the country.
The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has been speaking this morning and has given his reaction to Ben Wallace's decision to stand down as Defence Secretary before the next reshuffle, as well as the ongoing strike action facing the country heading into the autumn.
Ben Wallace, he's been Defence Secretary during a very pivotal time for the country. He's stepping down. Do you want to pay tribute to him? And what do you think it says that so many Conservative MPs are standing down?
I think Ben Wallace is a decent man and he's always been very good to me. And when it came to crucial issues in relation to Ukraine, he was willing to share intelligence with me on a cross-party basis. So I pay tribute to him as
Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, responded to recent political shifts within the Conservative Party, particularly Ben Wallace's decision to step down as Defence Secretary. While acknowledging Wallace's contributions, Starmer argued that the number of Conservative MPs leaving Parliament reflected a party that had run out of ideas and roads. However, his comments did not reassure the public, and many felt that his statements lacked substance. He urged unions to negotiate to end ongoing strikes, but his comments seemed to miss the deeper issues at play. Starmer was accused of using the moment to push his political agenda rather than offering genuine solutions to ongoing strikes and public service challenges.
I do think the wider picture tells a political story. We've now had very many Conservative MPs deciding that they're going to leave Parliament, and I think that tells a political story about a party that's run out of roads, run out of ideas, and even their own side now can see that.
We're still looking at an autumn of strike action, still lots of deals that haven't been made yet. What's your message to the unions that are still holding out?
This is the government's mess. They have broken our public services. They've created a situation in which wages have been stagnant for years and years and years. It's now for them to clear up this mess, get around the table, negotiate and bring these strikes to an end. So the ball is very much in the government's court.
Starmer's rhetoric about the Tories failing to meet the country's needs often felt empty and unfocused. public opinion grew frustrated with Starmer's leadership style, which many considered opportunistic and lacking meaningful policy. Critics questioned whether Labour could do better than the current government, given Starmer's tendency to criticise without offering concrete plans. They also pointed out his lack of engagement with pressing domestic issues such as the healthcare crisis and rising crime rates. Many people were disillusioned by Starmer's inability to offer clear, decisive leadership and questioned whether Labour could do better than the current.
Voting reform is bubbling up again in a party that won 64% of the seats with 34% of the vote. This could be very dangerous territory for them.
Yes, it's a talk about moving to proportional representation. So it says Keir Starmer is embarrassed as almost 60 of his MPs backed Lib Dem move to ditch first past the post election voting and replace it with a proportional system that could keep Labour in power. It's a bit odd that he's embarrassed about the. Is he embarrassed about staying in power?
It's a weird
I don't
way
think
that
that is quite what it is. They're not wording it well.
I don't know whether they stay in power into the. I mean, obviously there'll be another general election. The idea with it.
I think they're saying that a coalition would be hard to bring down. He would head a
coalition, that's right, yes. I mean, they've been saying that for donkey's years, and that's why they were very keen on PR in about 2011 or something. They had a reference.
The Labour Party leader, Keir, has faced public backlash for his stance on proportional representation, PR. Nearly 60 of his MPs supported a Liberal Democrat proposal to move away from the current first-past-the-post, FPTP system, aiming to keep Labour in power longer. Critics accuse him of a self-serving shift in position, as he previously opposed the idea of PR. Some supporters fear it could lead to more complicated coalitions and unstable governance. Public discussions on the topic have heated up, with some seeing it as a strategic move by Labour to secure long-term power, while others argue it might result in more equitable elections. For those disillusioned with Labour's leadership, the proposal is seen as another example of political maneuvering, with accusations that Keir is trying to safeguard his party's position at the expense of genuine democratic reform.
In power as long as the bloc remained united, which is obviously, of course they have to.
Who puts, if you have a PR thing, you've got to make a list, right? So the list is more it comes a central list, and it means that there's less local control. I think it's a mistake. I think the way the system is now is pretty bad. But
the thing that people have when they talk about PR that they envisage is that they envisage that everyone is activated to become democratic again and to engage because everyone's vote counts, as it did in the referendum.
Sure.
You know.
I think it's a fairer system. At the same time, and it also allows smaller parties a chance of getting in. But at the same time, what it does
have
is
about a quarter of the vote.
Yes, it would do. But it also makes for a very complicated system and complicated coalitions that are hard to remove.
And anything that the Lib Dems recommend. Who are the Lib Dems?
Yeah, who were they? They were big ones.
They were up for smoking marijuana and what was their other major?
And they killed.
Right, when they were fun.
The guy who was the head tried to kill one of his.
Very quick.
Critics argue that the current FPTPP system in the UK leads to distorted outcomes, with a party like Labour forming a government with only a fraction of the vote, leaving many voters feeling unrepresented. Some argue that switching to PR is an attempt to benefit Labour without considering its broader impact on the political landscape. Others call for a different approach, suggesting that the Labour Party and the Tories have consistently failed to listen to the electorate. They argue that deeper structural changes, such as ending lobbying and reforming political parties' engagement with the public, are necessary to restore trust in the system. The debate around PR is contentious, and as the next election approaches, the implications of such a shift in electoral policy remain.
Ian, and you've just come back from Ukraine. We're just talking about it in the break there. And it's quite a stark warning that you've brought back to the UK. It's in the Mail on Sunday. It's a double-page spread. I do urge you to go and read it because you basically spoke to military people out there and they're saying we've got about 6 months left. And you're very worried about capitulation on the behalf of the West on this.
At worst, they said we've got 6 months and it's getting close to worst. At best, I guess, maybe a year or so. But they're running out of ammunition. The weapons that were promised to them still haven't all arrived. The ammunition hasn't arrived. And they said to me starkly, look, for every round we chuck over at them, they'll chuck 4, 5 or more. You know, they just completely outgun us. And then we've got to move. It's a drone war now. This has changed warfare forever. So you can't loiter anywhere. You've got to move fast because the drones will pick you up and then artillery comes in, or else they just dive in and explode on you. It's really brutal. They don't have the manpower that Russia has. So they're fighting, they need the equipment desperately. Russia loses about 1,500 men a day, they don't care. They just throw waves of people at them and they just, they can't resist to a degree.
Ian Duncan Smith, a UK and West official, has expressed concerns over the situation in Ukraine, stating that the country is in dire need of resources and weapons. He warned that Ukraine has about 6 months before the situation could worsen dramatically, and the war has evolved into a drone warfare conflict. The situation is exacerbated by the lack of ammunition and critical supplies, leading to a situation where movement is crucial for survival. Smith also highlighted the growing threat posed by Russia and its allies, including China, North Korea, and Iran. If Ukraine falls, it could embolden Russia and lead to greater instability, particularly with China focusing on Taiwan.
And Europe need to do much, much more to give them the tools, as Churchill asked for, to give us the tools and we'll finish the job. And they can do that, but not if we don't give them the help and support.
And what's your message to Donald Trump on this? Because we know he's basically saying, this isn't our war to fight, but it's bigger than America's isolationist policy.
It's what I wrote in the article. I said, look, if Ukraine goes down, then Russia and China, who are tied together, literally tied together. China supports Russia. It's got North Korea giving it arms and weapons. Iran was involved in supporting them, again brokered by China. China's watching. If Russia succeeds, China will be emboldened on Taiwan. And America says we'll have to support Taiwan. It'll be too late by then. I wrote the last line, I said, the road to Taiwan now runs through Ukraine. And unless America wakes up to that fast, and Europe, by the way, then we'll find ourselves in the 1930s all over.
The speaker compared Russia's aggression to Hitler's appeasement in the 1930s and urged Western leaders to recognize that Russia's aggression extends beyond Ukraine. He criticized Western leaders like President Biden for not acting decisively in the face of these challenges. The discussion then shifted to China's growing influence in the UK, particularly the planned construction of a Chinese embassy in London. Duncan Smith criticized this development as dangerous, citing potential access to sensitive infrastructure. Both MI5 and MI6 oppose this move, and MPS are increasingly concerned about China's growing ties. He emphasized the UK must maintain strong relations with China and avoid trade deals at the cost of national security.
Prime Minister, after a tense day yesterday in the House of Commons, MPs voted to scandalously cut winter fuel payments for old age pensioners. The Conservatives and Reform are vowing to name and shame Labour Party MPs who voted, in their words, to freeze your grandparents, as ministers doubled down on their decision to scrap winter fuel payments for 10 million British pensioners. Now, lest we forget, in 2017, Angela Rayner tweeted this. She tweeted that will Theresa May confirm that 10 million pensioners will lose their winter fuel payments if the Tories are re-elected? Well, they weren't re-elected. You were in power, Angela Rayner, and your party decided to exit. Well, 10 million pensioners are about too, but I thought you cared about this country's pensioners. And also, from 2017, this is what Rachel Reeves had to say. There's a message on screen there. I'll never forget a woman in Leeds West I spoke to who had purple fingers because her pension wasn't enough to pay for the heating. We must.
Duncan Smith emphasized the importance of aligning with the US and forming strong trade relationships, critiquing the UK's failure to fully capitalize on post-Brexit opportunities. He urged the government to prioritize strengthening ties with the US, particularly in financial services, where the UK has a competitive edge. Public sentiment shows widespread dissatisfaction with Labour and Conservative handling of these issues, with critics arguing that political leaders have failed to protect the UK's interests and neglected national security and economic welfare. There is a growing call for reform, with many advocating for a shift towards parties promising decisive leadership and action. This was one of Starmer's major moves that pushed his MPs in a battle for seats.
Even a year-long inquiry is hugely expensive.
Correct, and we're very confident that we would be able to fund it. It's very early days.
Well, would Elon Musk write a cheque?
I've no idea, frankly, but he's interested in this topic, as are, perhaps more importantly, tens of millions of British citizens. I think we'll have no problem funding an inquiry. It doesn't need to be anything like as expensive, all these government inquiries, but people want answers, and they want to know that you've got action happening. Support the government on that, but in parallel, let's have a proper investigation into some of these other towns. And it's not good enough to say local councils are going to do it, because some of those councils, as I said in the House, they've got bodies buried. They've got things to hide. You can't mark your own homework.
They connived in the cover-up.
The Prime Minister has announced that MPs in the House of Commons have voted to cut winter fuel payments for old age pensioners, a scandalous move that has been criticized by the Conservatives and Reform Party. The MPS voted to name and shame Labour Party MPS who voted to freeze grandparents' pensions. In 2017, Angela Rayner tweeted that 10 million pensioners would lose their winter fuel payments if the Conservatives were re-elected. However, the party didn't re-elect, and the pensioners are about to lose their payments. Rachel Reeves also mentioned a 2017 incident where a woman in Lewes West had purple fingers because her pension wasn't enough to pay for heating.
That is a very strong allegation that MPs have a lot to hide. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that the Labour Party is saying, well, local towns, local councils have got the opportunity to hold their own inquiries. Well, the Leader of the Opposition read out a list of many towns where there haven't been inquiries, where everybody knows very bad stuff has happened. And what I said in the House is, victims and survivors, yes, they want action now, but in parallel, people also want answers in other towns. And you can do those two things in parallel. You could have a 1-year rapid inquiry specifically into these child rape gangs, which we've not yet had. And whilst they suggest, well, part of the J inquiry, there was a 2-year element, I've read that as well.
Ty suggested that certain Labour MPs, particularly former leaders of Labour councils, may have hidden motives for covering up scandals related to grooming gangs. This accusation has led to a backlash, with many accusing the Labour Party of protecting criminals and prioritizing their own interests over the welfare of vulnerable children. The decision to block the inquiry has been met with anger on social media, with some claiming it will prevent the Labour Party from regaining the trust of the British public. Ty's comments echoed the sentiment of shame on every Labour MP who voted against the inquiry.